Hello, friends. It's so nice for you to join us in this conference. You're joining not only us, but many of Ananda's best speakers from around the world in this conference, Beyond Mind, Crossroads of Ancient Teachings and Emerging Science. And each of us will take a different topic, a different subject. It's like one great diamond with many facets, and we'll be exploring many of those facets today.
One of the things that will be a focus of this conference is how, through science, we're realizing that the world is all interconnected on a very subtle level. And this is what the yogis have been telling us for a long time. So we hope you will feel connected with all of us, and we hope this will give you greater insight into how your own evolution is going and how society as a whole is evolving.
Let's begin with a prayer to the great masters of the world, and particularly, since we're inspired by it, our lineage. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, great masters, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, and Paramhansa Yogananda Ji, great saints of all religions, we humbly bow to you all. O Lord, bless us with your wisdom, with your love, and ultimately with your joy. Help us realize that we are all a part of thee and all united to each other. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. I thought it would be a good idea to begin today's talk with some words from Paramhansa Yogananda. He gave a wonderful talk in 1940 called Making Religion Scientific. And I want to read the first 3 short paragraphs of that talk because it's so pertinent to what not only Devi and I will be talking about, but what the other speakers will be talking about today. It sets it all, as I mentioned, this is like a diamond. It sets that diamond in its proper setting. So here's what Master said in 1940. God is approachable. Talking of him and listening to his words in the scriptures, thinking of him, feeling his presence in meditation, you will see that gradually the unreal becomes real. And this world, which you think is real, will be seen as unreal. There's no joy like that realization. The joy of God is boundless, unceasing, all the time new. Body, mind, nothing can disturb you when you are in that consciousness. Such is the grace and glory of the Lord. And he will explain to you whatever you haven't been able to understand, everything you want to know. There's no use trying to know too much now. How many incarnations would you have to spend to learn all that is written in the book of nature? All things you will find and understand in God. The masters of India have always said, first know him. Then whatever you desire to know, he will reveal to you. This is his kingdom. This is his knowledge. And so, as we go through this day and talk about the many different subjects, remember that these words imply that the purpose of what we're doing is really in order to achieve that understanding, that unity with God, or in the terminology of Yogananda, self-realization. He called it, interestingly enough, self-realization, not God realization, because if he called it God realization, it would seem perhaps as if God was something outside of us, whereas self-realization means to realize what we really are. And so all of these various topics are going to be extremely interesting. Certainly if you scan through or watch the presentations, you will see so many, many aspects of emerging science, of ancient teachings, of the topic of beyond mind. But it's good to remember that all of these various subjects are means to one end. And the means to that end is self-realization. And the means to that end can vary. And not only do they vary from person to person according to their temperament, but they vary for each of us according to, one might say, what we're interested in this particular moment. All of us are multifaceted individuals. And this age that we find ourselves in, that we have chosen to incarnate in, one might say is the age of science. And science gradually has been uncovering, one might say, over the last 500 years or so, has gradually been uncovering more and more subtle levels of reality. When science started, science and religion really seemed to be at odds with each other. In fact, Galileo, who postulated that the Earth was not the center of the universe, but rather the Earth rotated around the sun, he was declared a heretic by the religious authorities of his day. And even though his theory obviously was right, he had to recant of his heresy in order to be able to continue doing what he was doing. So at that time, the point being, at that time, science and religion were absolutely at loggerheads against each other. It was as if those interested in religion had the territorial imperative to protect their knowledge of truth and have everyone not only believe that, but believe only that. Well, science has come a long, long way since then. But nonetheless, science, as I think Purushottama is going to point out in his talk, has a materialistic bent. That means science is basically locked in or wedded to what can be perceived by the senses or with instruments that extend the senses, but definitely what can be perceived by logic and by experimentation. Gradually, science has been loosening that a little bit. So just as religion had the territory of truth in the beginning, now one might say that science has that territory and the monopoly on truth, at least for many people. But gradually, as we go deeper and deeper, what is beginning to emerge is really, really interesting, my friends. The most advanced of the modern physicists, those who are really looking at the universe at its fundamental level, are beginning to sound a lot more like yogis of ancient times than they are sounding like scientists of 200 or 300 years ago. Because as we go more and more deeply, we see that science and religion are not opposing forces. They are simply different ways of trying to discover the truth. And so this emergence or merging of ancient wisdom and emerging science is not only a wonderful topic, but one might say it is the process of uncovering truth that is going on today in our culture, in the world that we inhabit. As I say, you and I chose, whether we can remember it or not, we chose to incarnate during this time. One might say it just fit the vibrational level of our consciousness. Perhaps we had karma to fulfill that could only be done at this time. Perhaps we had interests that aligned to the world that we live in. But for all of us, even though we chose to incarnate in this time, the journey of life is to go beyond time, is to go beyond space, because self-realization, as Master said, as Yogananda said in the reading that I started out with, is self-realization will help us discover that that which seems real, that means this current world, the world of the senses, the world of logic, that seems so real, and for most people, that it's unquestionably not only real, but the only world. And so they don't even stop to question it. But we're beginning to question it. But that search for ultimate truth is going to lead us to understand that what we have taken for granted as real is actually unreal. And what we are searching for these subtle truths, for self-realization, that actually is the real world. I want to read one more very, very interesting quote from Master. You know, we often, probably all of us, have asked, what is the purpose of life? Devi and I, when we travel, especially in India, we often get, especially younger people, but not always younger people, come up to us after a talk, and they'll finally get around to their real question is, what is the purpose of life? Does it have a purpose? So the question of what is the purpose of life has to be answered, in a sense, according to the level of consciousness of the person asking it. And so what I'm going to read from Master is not something we could always say to someone asking us what the purpose of life is. Because if the consciousness is not expanded enough or not subtle enough, this answer is going to seem to be cynical. But in fact, because Master is a realized, self-realized soul, he has gone through the process that we're going through, and he has arrived at the end of the journey, then we understand that this answer of what the purpose of life is comes from a higher point of consciousness, not a lower one. So he said, the purpose of life, the whole of creation is meant to disillusion you and thus draw you back to him. Isn't that interesting? The whole of creation, the purpose of it, is to disillusion us. And because of that disillusionment, we finally say, there must be something more. And that questioning begins to draw us back to him. I'm sure that you've felt it. I certainly have felt it. All, I think, those who are seeking on a spiritual path have felt in the heart of hearts that there is something more to life than what there is on the surface, than what can be discovered just through the physical sciences. And so, as Patanjali put it, and then we come to the study of yoga. Study of yoga is the study that will ultimately bring us to self-realization. Yoga is a particular kind of science and an ancient one. But I also want to point out that even though we look back at ancient truths that are expressed in yoga or expressed in the scriptures of India, or as Yogananda interpreted both the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Western scripture, the Bible, the teachings of Jesus and the teachings of Krishna, he interpreted those or explained those in order to show that there was unity between those two scriptures, unity between those two great masters. But the unity did not come from their personalities. The unity comes because those scriptures were two approaches to ultimate truth. And that ultimate truth, as Swami Kriyananda has pointed out, is not just for this age. It's not just for this planet. It's not just for humanity. It's not just for one religion or another religion. Ultimate truth goes beyond time and space and beyond even the creation of this universe. It's out of that truth, out of that ultimate consciousness of the Creator that creation springs forth. And so what we're going to be working on today is different approaches to try to get us to that ultimate truth. Now I want to come to talking about more specifically the subject that Devi and I are covering, which is, one might say, the keynote talk, but the merging of ancient wisdom and emerging science. And so Yogananda and this lineage was a harbinger of these not only ancient truths, but they were the harbinger of an approach to truth that is fitting for this age that we find us in. Later there'll be a section on the various yugas, so I'll just touch very lightly on the fact that we have shifted from Kali Yuga, the age of just material energy, or the age of form, to an understanding in now Dwapara Yuga. And science is, one might say, coexistent with the beginning of Dwapara Yuga is the beginning of our understanding of science. So those two go together. But in Dwapara Yuga, we understand that the world is made up of energy, and that the techniques that will bring us to understanding of an ultimate truth are made up of energy. And so the techniques that were given by our lineage are largely based on energy. Now, because America was, again, born at the beginning of Dwapara Yuga, the United States, unlike India, unlike countries in Europe, unlike almost everywhere else, the United States came into its existence at the beginning of Dwapara Yuga. It is a Dwapara Yuga country. And so Yogananda took these ancient teachings, and he didn't just bring them in their, one might say, unedited form. He looked through all of the ancient teachings, the ancient wisdom, and he brought the best and left the rest. So he's weeded out all of the superstition and misunderstandings. Our whole lineage did. So when he came to the United States, he came with a certain mission, and that mission had particular ideas in it. I want to read his aims and ideals, and they'll be projected up on the screen. Actually, I don't need to read them. You can read them yourself. Then I give you a minute or so to do that, and then I will talk particularly about 2 or 3 of them. Okay, I want to talk particularly about 4 of these. One, the first one he said, and this is very important, to disseminate among the nations a knowledge of definite scientific techniques for attaining direct personal experience of God. That personal experience trumps all of the theoretical knowledge, all of the reading, all of the scriptures, all of the thinking, everything else. Everything else should be done in order to help point us toward and propel us toward that ultimate direct experience of God. And so Yogananda came in order to give us the techniques for that. Furthermore, because Devi and I are going to touch on this, so to attain threefold perfect development, body, mind, and soul, to demonstrate the superiority of mind over body, of soul over mind, and finally, to harmonize science and religion through study and practical realization of the unity of their underlying principles. So in many ways, Yogananda was not only a harbinger coming from the East to the West, but he was bringing knowledge and a kind of a teaching to unite these two together. Yoga, after all, means union. It means to unite the soul with God. But yoga, especially the way Master is teaching it, is uniting many things together, East and West, science and religion and so on. So one could, tongue-in-cheek, rename Autobiography of a Yogi to Autobiography of a Uniter. He who has come to unite these things together. So I want to concentrate now for a little while on what his teachings were in terms of encapsulating how to work with body, mind, and soul. And so I want to begin by showing this little graphic that we did. We developed a couple of years ago for some seminars that we were doing in India. I think you'll enjoy it, and it puts in very clear form Master's different levels of body, not just then mind, but energy, then mind, and then spirit. So take a half a minute. It's 33 seconds long. So watch this. You'll enjoy it. Okay, so as you could see in that graphic, and with Yogananda's teaching, we have to start with the body, because that's where most of us are. That's where we spend 24 hours a day, and we have to work with that. And so Yogananda, and this line of great yogis, brought many, many teachings about how to have a healthy and vibrant body. This pyramid that you saw is called the Radiant Health Pyramid. So how to have radiant health. And we'll have several doctors talking today, and they will touch on different teachings of how to have a strong body, how to maintain health, how to work with that which we're given and really optimize that. But if we only stop at the body, as so much of modern society does, I'm sure that you, as well as I, have looked at things on the internet, and the internet and modern media is so body-oriented, so image-oriented, and it's hard to break through that, only kind of on the fringy edge. Do people talk about anything more than that? But Master said, not only do we have a physical level, but it is the lowest of the levels, meaning that the others have more leverage toward our happiness and toward our ultimate fulfillment, which is direct experience or self-realization. So Master brought many, many teachings that have to do with the control of energy. And that control of energy, one might say, is the link. Energy is the link between the body and the mind and emotions. And so Yogananda brought energization exercises. He brought, hundreds of different techniques and teachings about how to properly use our willpower. His highest prayer was, Heavenly Father, I will reason, I will act, I will, but guide Thou my reason, will, and activity to the right path in everything. So that willpower, that use of energy is absolutely critical. And if we do not learn how to work with, to harmonize, and to spiritualize the energies in the body, if we just see the body as a physical form, we'll miss out on 95% of what is needed in order to have our own happiness here on the physical plane, let alone to move us to the higher planes. And then, as you saw, the mental and emotional level, Yogananda, again, the power of the mind is virtually infinite, and especially the power of the mind when aligned with the influence of God, of our own higher nature. And so the influence of God flowing through the power of the mind has almost no limit to it. So positive thinking, control of our thoughts that comes gradually as we make an attempt to do that is, one might say, even more powerful than controlling the energy, because the energy control is going to allow us to have mental control. Even in our teachings of yoga, the stage of pranayama is there in order to let us control and withdraw energy, and that allows us to have our consciousness properly placed. And the other aspect that we need to do for our own happiness is to learn to control our reactive processes. Now, all of these things, fortunately, we are teaching our children, and Aryavan is going to talk about education for life principles. And so we're trying to train not only ourselves, but the children in our schools in the integration of all of these levels, to see the whole person, to see a completely integrated person. And so the level of the power of the mind with positive thinking and mental control and emotional control through controlling the reactive processes, that is necessary to bring us to that which is most powerful and that which is most important, which is the spiritual level. And that the primary technique is meditation and the path of Kriya Yoga that we teach and we practice. Now, the reason that meditation is so important is because, remember, the purpose is to have direct experience. Well, if the mind is ruffled, if the thoughts are too active, if the emotions are uncontrolled, if we can't move our energy properly, we can't come to the realization or the direct experience of our ultimate reality. So set aside all of the techniques. The purpose of meditation is to calm the body, calm the energy, the emotions, and finally to withdraw from the senses sufficiently so that our consciousness is calmed down and not constantly being spread outward in a million different directions. And that calming down and focusing of our consciousness, that allows us to perceive who and what we really are. It is that allows us to have that direct experience of God, that self-realization that Yogananda is talking about, and that is, my friends, for all of us, the real purpose of life. God bless you.
Hello, friends. I'm very happy to be with you as part of this Beyond Mind conference. And I really think that such an event will have ripples and impact on many, many people, perhaps more than are just with us today. But it's such a central and important concept to help our world move forward in these rather turbulent, chaotic times. Our topic that we're focusing on today is crossroads, ancient wisdom and emerging science. And let's look at this a little bit now, stepping back, and what is science? What is yoga? What commonality do they share? Well, I think by definition, science is something that tries to pragmatically discover truth about the physical world through testing, through experiment, but not just through theorizing. And similarly, yoga is a science, but it's a science on a subtler level than physical science. Also, through experience, through trial and effort, the great yogi scientists of the past have discovered how to explore truth and reality in practical ways. This works, this doesn't work. And so both science and yoga are trying to discover truths. But because yoga approaches it on a subtler level, the truths that it uncovers have a deeper and more significant reflection of really what is the reality of the universe. Now, sometimes people go to a yoga class and they think, well, that's nice, but that's old. That's from ancient times. Well, true enough, it is from ancient times. But remember that as we were talking about different cycles of time, of ages of man, there are higher and lower ages. And the yoga sciences came from a higher age, millennia ago. And when men and women were able to perceive truth more clearly, more directly, more intuitively. Also, yoga is not trying to find this little aspect of truth or that little aspect, but it's trying to find what is eternal, what is lasting beyond the civilization in which we live. As Jyotish was saying, the Bhagavad Gita and the Bible and many great scriptures, they're not of their time only, but they are trying to translate eternal truths in such a way that people of current times, contemporary times, can relate to them. And so it is with yoga, is trying to present eternal truths. And this was why we emphasize so much the teachings of our guru, Paramhansa Yogananda, because he was a wonderful translator. He said, what I bring to the West is the cream of the science of yoga. Because he said, I know Westerners want quick results. They want things, they want to try it, and if it works for them, then they'll commit to it. And so he didn't take us on by roads or detours or dead ends, but he gave us techniques and teachings that are practical, that are effective, and that we ourselves can discover that they really work. So what are some of these ancient truths that we're talking about from Vedic times? And let me do a little footnote here. What do we mean by Vedic times? Thousands of years ago, many great, highly evolved souls composed what they called the Vedas, or scriptures. And they tried to encapsulate the wisdom, the eternal truths that they themselves perceived and that were also handed down from higher ages. And one of the main components, the main tenets of this, of the Vedic scriptures, is that this world is based on Maya, or duality. Literally, Maya means the measurer, that which takes a unified whole and breaks it up into little pieces, little diverse, succinct units. You know, when I was first coming on the path, I think God was trying to say, this girl needs a lot of help, I better give her an experience. And so I had an experience, very powerful, that stuck with me for a long time, still till today, I was about to come to Ananda. I was living in Madison, Wisconsin, going to school there in the Midwest of America. And I was sitting on a beautiful lake on a spring day. And all of a sudden, it was as though my mind pulled back. And I saw the lake and the people swimming in it, and the people strolling around the shore, and the little ducks paddling in it, and people in sailboats. I saw all of it, but it was one thing. It wasn't broken up into separate little units. And the thought that came into my mind was, how did they ever come up with the concept of one? When it's there, like that's one thing and that's one thing, when there's only totality. And in fact, the concept of zero, oneness, came from the mathematics of India. And so the Vedas teach us that this principle of duality, of polarity, is what holds this physical universe in manifestation, that God is one. But in order to create this manifested universe, he had to adopt the delusion, the veil of diversity. And this is an important thing to remember in today's world, isn't it? Though things may seem diverse, opinions and patterns of living, underneath it all, humanity there's one brotherhood, sisterhood of God. And so the Vedas presented this. And Master said, when we say Master, we're referring to our guru, Paramhansa Yogananda. He said that on this principle of duality, all of modern science has developed. And what does he mean by that? Well, you look at Newton's law of action. And he said, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction, that one cannot exist without the other. There's light, there's dark, there's good, there's evil. You fill in the blanks. But this principle of for every action, there's the opposite exists as well in the physical world. That was Newton's law that he gave us. When we look at electricity, it's also bound by pulses of positive and negative energy. When we look at exploration of the atom, it has a positive and negative pole. The earth itself has a positive and negative pole. So the same principle of duality is reflected in all modern science. And Yoganandaji also said that mankind discovers the appropriate truth by God's grace at different times in history to help with the evolution of mankind. And so as the cutting-edge physicists and scientists explore deeper and deeper into what is reality, they are coming up against a wall beyond which they are beginning to realize they can't pass through. And Marconi, the inventor of the wireless telegraph, he said, these are great quotes, I hope I get them right, the inability of physical science to solve what life is absolute. He's saying science can't do it. It's absolute. Another great scientist is Sir Arthur Eddington, who is a very eminent British astrophysicist, said that the world of physical science, the world that it studies, is a world of shadows. And this is the greatest realization of modern science. So they're all coming with the same conclusion. Another respected physicist said, Sir James Jean was his name, he said that the world is starting to look less and less like a great machine and more like a great thought. And so all these scientists, and these are leaders in their field, are starting to say there is a limit beyond which physical science can discover the true nature of reality. And as Jyotish quoted Patanjali, the great exponent of yoga, you might think of him as the Einstein of yoga compared to what Einstein was to physics. Patanjali said, and now we come to the science of the study of yoga, because it's only when we realize that the exploration of physical sciences have a limit. Then we began to, how do we pierce the veil? How do we begin to understand what reality really is? And then we come to the yogis who have pierced the veil through intuitive perception, through concentration of the mind, interiorization of the mind, and opening up to higher guidance and inspiration. And our friend Albert Einstein, who we'll talk more about later, he said, intuition is the father of all new knowledge. And if you ever want to just find very interesting, humorous, expansive quotes, do a Google search for famous quotes by Albert Einstein. He really was, though a physicist, and he considered himself an agnostic at best, but there is such a profound reverence for the creative power behind this universe that he was a great yogi, even though he probably would have been mortified if you called him that to his face. But we come to the study of the science of yoga to pierce the veil that scientists can't do just studying the physical universe. And now I thought it would be fun to start exploring what are some of the breakthroughs in science and how does yoga take them the next step. First, we'll start with perhaps the law in physics called the law of entanglement. And this, simply put, and I am not deeply trained in physics, modern physics, but I can understand superficially. Entanglement means that things are connected. Things had a great difference. A little molecule in this part of the universe turns, and its counterpart in another part of the universe turns. And Einstein actually worked with this too, and he called it spooky. And again, I love the consciousness of Albert Einstein. And so how does yoga deal with this? Well, it too realizes that there is entanglement, that all life is connected. And, you know, there's the beautiful story, even at a distance, even people you never know, it affects. There's the beautiful story, there was a book about Buddha's enlightenment called The Light of Asia. And it talks about the moment, for those of you who know Buddha's story, he was born a prince with every pleasure and luxury, but then he discovered that one day, and his father, who he wanted the young Buddha Siddhartha to inherit the kingdom, he never let him leave the palace grounds because he didn't want him to see what the real world really was. But one day he asked his charioteer, "Take me into the village." And he saw a person who was sick. And he said, "What is this?" And he said, "That's sickness, Lord." To his prince. "Does it happen to everyone?" "Oh, yes, it happens to all people." And then he saw someone begging. And he said, "What is that, my Lord?" He said, "That's poverty. Do many people experience this?" "Yes, my prince." He saw someone grieving over a lost loved one. "What is that, my Lord?" "That, my Lord, is death." "Does it happen to everyone?" "Yes, my Lord." And he saw them carrying a corpse away for cremation. "Does it happen to everyone?" "Yes, my Lord." And in that moment, the Buddha knew his mission. He left all the pleasures of the world, and he went off, discarded his royal raiments, went into the forest, and meditated and tried to find truth. And in that moment of enlightenment, as it says, coming back to our theory of entanglement, in that moment when Buddha achieved enlightenment, self-realization, whatever you call it, it said throughout the world a pulse went out. And people everywhere, maybe a mother was arguing with her child, peace was found. Maybe a man was going to steal from a neighbor, decided not to do it. All over the world, a wave of peace and harmony. This is entanglement. Sri Yukteswar, our guru's guru, said that the ability of a man of self-realization to affect the world is much greater than the world to affect him. So the more we are able to, through the practice of yoga and meditation, to hold our consciousness up, to project those thoughts out, people we don't even know. I'm going to take a little aside here. I hope I won't run over time. You know, Jyotish and I write a weekly blog called Touch of Light. We got a beautiful email yesterday from a friend of ours in India who is part of our center in Chennai, but she's gotten a job elsewhere, and she's working she's a doctor, working as a medical doctor for a factory. And she said there's a woman there who's sort of the overseer. And she was very nice to our friend, Sharmila, but very dictatorial to the people who work there. And Sharmila said she was a nice person, but that she just related to them in a very aggressive, almost abusive way. Sharmila had on her desk a copy of our book, A Touch of Love. And the woman walked in, and they were talking. She said, "Oh, what is this book?" She said, "Oh, you can borrow it." She read the book and came back, and she said, "I've been very wrong in my life. I haven't treated people nicely. I'm going to change." This is entanglement, where our consciousness can affect people in ways we have no idea. And then, moving on, there's our friend Sir Isaac Newton with his theory of action and reaction. Well, how do yogis talk about this? pretty self-evident. It's the law of karma. What we do comes back. We put out love in the world, it comes back. We put out aggressiveness and selfishness in the world, it comes back. There's no escaping. It's mathematical. Our friend Albert Einstein also said, God does not play dice with the universe, meaning it's governed by laws. And if we think we can get away with it, oh, I'll just steal a little bit, no one will ever know, I'll not be grateful to someone who's been gracious to me, what difference does it make? The law of cause and effect, of action and reaction, of karma, it all comes back. And so this is a guideline for living. This is how we see that the coming together of science and religion show us powerfully, reinforce each other that this is truth. You know, also with this law of karma, we come back to Patanjali. He has a beautiful, his Ashtanga Yoga, his Eightfold Path. And I'll do a little plug here. My dear friends Nayaswami Devi, Nayaswami Diksha are doing a series, an online series on how to live Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, but I'll touch on it very, very briefly. In the beginning, the first step, it's an eightfold step of how to achieve God self-realization, God consciousness. And the first step is just two steps, how to live in the world, the yamas, the don'ts, the niyamas, the do. I'll just focus on two of them. The first niyama is non-violence or non-injury. Why? Because again, entanglement, we're all connected. What we do comes back to us. If we injure others, we draw that to ourselves. And the great spiritual leaders of our time, Mahatma Gandhi, political spiritual leaders, Martin Luther King, who went to India and studied these teachings. I just read about that relatively recently. They practiced nonviolence because they knew you don't overcome hate with hate. You overcome hate with love. And this is what the world is struggling to understand now. So that's one way that this law of both action and reaction and entanglement is applied. The second niyama that I'll touch on, and then we'll move on, is non-lying. To speak the truth. And why is this important? Because if we act in an honest way, if we speak the truth, we align ourselves with the power of truth, which is at the heart of creation. And this is known as dharma, right action, living truth in everything that you do. And this, I think if I would look at one thing in the world today that I would try to help, it's non-lying. I don't know why this power of misinformation and lying and deceit, it's so prevalent that it seems like nothing is real, nothing is true. But there is truth beyond human perception, beyond opinions. And that's why one of the principles of Ananda that Swami said is, there's an Indian saying, but the translation in Sanskrit, but the translation is, where there is a dharma or adherence to truth, there is victory. So we need to understand that people, maybe for a little while, can seem to be victorious by lying, living adharmically, but in the long run, dharma is victory. So this is how we live and apply these teachings. And then we come to another principle of physics, which is, Swami would often talk about this. This is we mentioned Sir Arthur Eddington earlier. This is the second law of thermodynamics. And what is that? Why in the world is Devi talking about that when she doesn't really understand it? I understand it a little enough to share. That it's the law of entropy, meaning every system, every organism, the energy diminishes. It is depleted. And Eddington talked about the arrow of time, that it's like an arrow is shot and then it eventually falls to the earth, and that's time. But what the yogis teach us, and how we can apply this, is that time is not a reality. This was another thing that Einstein's theory of relativity, which we'll talk about in a moment, it said that the only constant in the universe is the speed of light, and time and space are just measured by that by the human mind. They're not a reality. And so the yogis teach us that time is not real, that this diminishing, inevitable diminishing of all life, all civilizations, all planets, all solar systems, that isn't, it happens only on the physical world. But behind it all is the eternal presence of God. And that eternal presence is unchanging. And that's what we need to identify with. Yes, our bodies will get old. Yes, this body will die. But that doesn't mean our consciousness dies. Why? We don't need to be afraid of death. We don't need to be afraid of old age. There was a woman, one of Master's direct disciples, a great saint and a great devotee. Her name was Kamala Silva, and Master refers to her often. She wrote the beautiful book, The Flawless Mirror, about her experiences with Master. Towards the end of her life, she had dementia. And we brought her here to Ananda village to care for her. And someone asked Swami Kriyananda, "Oh, Swamiji, why is this happening? She was such a great soul, and now she doesn't remember things." And Swami said, "Oh, it's just the mind. Her soul is still soaring in joy and bliss." And so, again, we look at the reality of the diminishing aspect of all life, all creation, but then we say that's not the last word. The last word is the eternal truth of God and His Spirit within us. And how do we activate this? I think we need to talk just a bit about the science of Kriya Yoga, because Sri Yukteswar said that understanding the mastery of the breath to achieve self-realization is India's unique and eternal contribution to human understanding. And so Kriya Yoga helps us to work with the flow of cosmic energy, so we don't identify with the body, we don't identify with the changing, sifting sands all around us, but we reside within that energy flow, uniting breath and energy and bringing them to the spiritual eye. Again, the science of yoga, practice it, do it, you get results. It's not something, oh yeah, maybe I'll do it. But again, like a great scientist, Thomas Edison, when he was discovering the filament for the light bulb, I believe he did use 10,000 different elements before he found the one that worked in the electric light bulb. And so if we think, oh, well, I did Kriya Yoga, I tried and it didn't work. That's not what scientists do. And if they can do that with the physical universe, we can do it with working with the subtle truths of energy and consciousness that are the laboratory that yogis work with. That's what they're trying to unfold, to open up to the world. And then finally, our dear friend Albert Einstein with his theory of relativity. We saw a documentary about his life, and as a young man, still while a patent clerk in Switzerland, he was just obsessed with light. What is light? Why? Where is it from? How does it be present in the world? And it said as a young man he didn't have a lot of friends because he would go to coffee shops and they would want to be socializing and talking. He just wanted to talk about light. And then in an intuitive flash, he understood that light was the constant and everything else was a variation on that, time, space, everything. But it took him, again, the scientist, persisting undeterred. It took him, I believe, 20 years to mathematically prove it. But again, remember, he said, intuition is the father of new knowledge. And he knew that from experience, that light is the center of, it's the core of all that is. And how do yogis apply that? Well, perhaps it's self-evident. There's that beautiful story in the first chapter of Autobiography of a Yogi by Yogananda ji, where he says he was one day as a young boy, he doesn't say exactly his age, but under 10, he was sitting on his bed meditating, and the thought came to his mind, what is behind the darkness of closed eyes? And immediately there was this flash of light, and he saw these saintly figures sitting on mountain peaks and on crags and caves. And he said, who are you? And they said, we are the Himalayan yogis. And he said, I want to come and be with you. And then they disappeared. But a more prevalent, that was like the little differentiations of the light. Then the light just appeared undifferentiated. And little Yoganandaji said, who are you? And a voice said, I am Ishwara, I am light. And Yoganandaji said, I want to be one with you. And then the vision began to fade, but he said, a permanent legacy of blessings remained with me from that time on. And so that light that Yogananda perceived, the light that Einstein understood was the underlying reality of everything, the light that the yogis tell us is the core of our own being. All of these are the merging of sensitive, scientific thinkers and enlightened yogis. So my friends, we live in a wonderful time where we will witness the coming together of disparate ways of thinking and move forward from a time of seeing only the differences between other people and us, between other nations and our nation, but to realize that the underlying reality of all is not the Maya that the yogis discovered, not the duality of the physical world that it reflects, but the underlying unity of divine light from which we all come, in which we all live, to which we will all ultimately find union. God bless you.